They all laughed. Not polite chuckles, not nervous laughter. Real, rich, mocking laughter. My Aunt Denise actually clapped. My cousin Brett leaned back in his chair and whispered, "She got $1?" And my father, he didn't even hide it. He laughed so hard he had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. I just sat there, frozen, humiliated. My name had just been called. Madeline Everly. That's me, 31, freelance photographer, barely getting by in Brooklyn. And the lawyer, Mr. Harlan, had read out my inheritance from my grandmother's estate. $1. That's all. The room was packed, mahogany walls, crystal light fixtures, and the air so thick with perfume and entitlement it was hard to breathe. My entire family sat around that glossy conference table like they were the royal court of Connecticut. Suits, pearls, watches that cost more than my rent for a year. They had just spent the past hour dividing vacation homes, trust funds, vineyards. And then came me, Madeline, the disappointment, the dropout, the mistake. $1. The lawyer even paused, like he expected someone to object, but no one did. They just laughed. And then Mr. Harlan did something I'll never forget. He cleared his throat, slid his glasses up his nose, and said, "There is one more item, a sealed envelope to be given privately to Miss Everly." Suddenly, the room went silent. Aunt Denise stopped smiling. Brett straightened up. And my father? He narrowed his eyes like he had just lost control of something he didn't know he had to worry about. I didn't say a word. I just followed Mr. Harlan out of the room and into a side office, my legs barely moving, my heart pounding louder than his polished shoes against the tile floor. He handed me a cream-colored envelope. My name, handwritten in blue ink. I recognized the cursive. It was hers. My grandmother, Eleanor Everly, Manhattan real estate magnate. Former art critic. The woman who built half of Tribeca and once gave a TED Talk titled Legacy Without Guilt. And the woman who, 2 weeks ago, had died peacefully in her townhouse, surrounded by antique sculptures and a family who thought they understood her. But they didn't know this was coming. I didn't either. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Inside, a letter. Several pages, actually. The first line, "My dear Madeline, if they're laughing, good. That means the first part worked." I froze. What did that mean? What had worked? I kept reading. And with each word, the walls around me began to shift. The story I thought I knew about my family, about her, was unraveling. But maybe I should back up for a moment, because none of this would make sense unless you knew what came before that day in the will reading, before the envelope, before the laughter, back to when I still believed I wasn't worth more than $1 in their world, back to when I thought I didn't belong. I was born into the Everly name, but never quite fit into its shadow. My father, Richard Everly, is a hedge fund architect, the kind of man who reads the Wall Street Journal during breakfast and makes decisions like cutting his own daughter out of the will over cold eggs Benedict. My mother, Cecilia, never challenged him. She'd host charity luncheons, wear tailored blazers, and pretend to smile through her teeth every time I brought up art school. I was their only child, and somehow still their biggest disappointment. From the time I could walk, it was all spreadsheets and tennis lessons, legacy, prestige, the Everly brand. But I didn't care about the brand. I cared about light, shapes, silence. When I was 8, I stole my mom's Polaroid and snapped a picture of the kitchen floor where a crack in the marble looked like a falling star. They thought I'd broken something. I thought I'd found something. It got worse in high school. They sent me to a private prep in the Upper East Side. White walls, navy uniforms, Latin mottos. I brought a disposable camera to class and shot portraits of cafeteria workers, janitors, kids crying in the hall. I submitted a photo essay titled, "What We Pretend Not to See" to the school's annual showcase. They banned it. My father said, "You don't air laundry in public, Maddie." My mother said, "Why don't you try portraits of flowers instead?" And then my grandmother entered the picture. Eleanor. She was different, not warm exactly, but present, sharp. She would show up unannounced to my apartment in Williamsburg, dressed in Chanel, holding some obscure art book she'd just rediscovered from the 70s. She'd never say it directly, but I knew she saw me. She'd glance at my photos and say things like, "The lens doesn't lie, darling, but it does reveal what others refuse to see." Once, I caught her watching me edit for hours, not interrupting, not advising, just watching. Then she told me something I still can't forget. Madeline, the world doesn't need another heir. It needs a witness. At the time, I thought she was just being poetic. But now, as I sat in that silent office, holding her letter, I realized she'd been preparing me all along. In that envelope, she told me everything. The dollar was a decoy, a test. She wanted to expose them. She wanted me to see how easily they dismissed me, how quickly they laughed when they thought I had nothing. Because, my dear, the letter read, when people believe you're powerless, they show you who they really are. That line hit like a brick, and then she laid it out, plain, strategic, brilliant. She had transferred the majority stake in a private holding company, Everly Arts Initiative, to me. Not my father, not the board, not the heirs in tailored suits. Me. I blinked. Reread. The initiative wasn't just a shell. It owned 3 buildings in Manhattan, a permanent gallery space in Soho, and the rights to a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to elevating underrepresented voices in visual storytelling. It also owned dozens of works of art, rare prints, photographs, some of which were mine. I thought they were lost, sold, forgotten. She had bought them back, quietly, cataloged them, preserved them, under aliases, as if she were building a museum behind my back and handing me the keys. But it wasn't about revenge. She made that clear. You'll be tempted to prove them wrong, she wrote. Don't. Prove yourself right. I stared out the office window, the city blurring into streaks of amber and steel. All my life, I had felt like a mistake at their table, a lowercase name in capitalized legacy. But now I held something real, and the question wasn't what they thought of me anymore. It was, what was I going to do with it? Would I stay small, stay hidden, or finally show them who I had become? The envelope didn't just hold a letter, it held blueprints. Attached to the final page was a deed, my name typed in bold, granting me full ownership of a property at 217 Mercer Street. I knew that address. I'd walked past it a dozen times, never guessing what it held behind its graffiti-streaked doors. It was an old printing factory, renovated with skylights and exposed beams. My grandmother had bought it years ago under a trust no one in the family had ever noticed. Now it was mine. There was also a key, brass, heavy, on a thin velvet cord, and one final sentence, written in a different pen, slightly slanted. The gallery is ready. Fill it. I left the lawyer's office with the letter tucked in my coat. My family didn't even glance at me as I walked past the glass conference room. They were still joking. Brett mimed rubbing a dollar between his fingers. Aunt Denise was already talking about Europe. They had no idea. I didn't go home. I went straight to Mercer Street. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the world changed. Sunlight spilled across polished concrete floors. The walls were white, tall, and empty. And in the center, under a soft ceiling spotlight, stood a table. On it, prints, dozens of them. My photos. Photos I hadn't seen in years. Photos from when I was 17, 22, 27. Photos I'd taken, doubted, and sold for pennies. She'd found them, all of them. Each print had a handwritten tag. Lower East Side 2013, Shelter Number 4, Winter. Jesse, Rooftop. They were framed, museum quality, like they mattered. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. I'd spent so many years being unseen, unheard. But she had been watching, quietly. She'd believed in the part of me I wasn't even sure existed anymore. I sat down on the floor in the middle of that space and cried. The kind of crying that comes from years of pretending you're okay. But grief doesn't wait for timing. Because just when I thought the emotion had crested, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. Hope you didn't take the dollar too personally. Grandma was dramatic to the end. Then brunch Sunday? I stared at the screen. Brunch. As if that entire performance, my public humiliation, their laughter, meant nothing. As if I could just show up, smile, and pretend we still shared something beyond blood and bitterness. But I didn't reply. Instead, I started to plan. The gallery was empty now, but it wouldn't stay that way. I had an idea, one my grandmother might have even anticipated. An exhibit, a show, one night, one message, a debut collection titled Inheritance. But not about money, not about power, about what we leave behind when we stop performing, about what it means to be seen. Really seen. I spent the next 4 weeks working until I forgot to sleep. I curated pieces, old and new, portraits of strangers, moments of silence, blurred city corners where stories whispered through cracks in the pavement. I printed, mounted, lit every corner of the gallery myself. No interns, no curators, just me. And then I sent the invitations, white cardstock, letterpressed in soft gray ink, to critics, curators, donors, and of course, my family. They received theirs by courier, hand-delivered, signed for. The reactions came quickly. Brett RSVP'd yes, +1. Aunt Denise called my mother. My mother texted, "Is this real? Where did you get the money for this? Should we bring champagne?" I said nothing. Let them wonder. Let them stew in the space between what they think I have and what I'm about to show them. And then opening night arrived. The gallery doors opened at 6 p.m. By 6:45, the space was full. Cameras flashed. Voices echoed against the high ceilings. People whispered names, asked questions, wrote notes in leather-bound moleskines. And then at 7:03, they walked in. My family, all of them. My father in a navy suit he probably wore to court. My mother, tight-lipped in pearls. Brett chewing gum like this was some kind of open bar in Midtown. They stepped in and froze. The first thing they saw was a photo. It was me, not posed, not polished, a candid shot taken by an old friend in college. Me crying in a bathroom stall after a professor told me my work was emotionally indulgent. Beneath it, inheritance, entry wound. They looked confused. Then they kept walking. Each photo told a story they'd tried to ignore. People without names, places they'd never been, moments they'd never bothered to ask about. And then in the final room, there was a glass display case. Inside, the $1 bill, framed, perfectly centered. Underneath, a small card, estimated value, unknown. Actual worth, more than they ever imagined. They didn't speak at first. The air was thick with confusion, tension pulsed in waves, settling in the silence between footfalls. My mother stepped forward. She squinted at the caption beneath the dollar, then turned toward me with that brittle smile she wore at galas when someone spilled wine on her shoes. "This is interesting," she said slowly. I didn't respond. She gestured to the room, to the crowd. "All this, where did it come from? Who helped you?" I let the question hang there, because it wasn't really a question. It was an accusation in disguise. My father had wandered off by then, trailing a finger along a frame. He stopped in front of a photo taken from behind a glass shelter door, a teenage boy sleeping on the floor of a train station. He frowned. "Is this meant to be art?" I tilted my head. "No," I said. "It's meant to be memory." He looked at me like I'd just spoken Greek. I spotted Mr. Harlan near the back of the gallery. He gave me a nod, the kind that said, "Ready when you are." I stepped onto the small platform near the center of the room. The soft spotlight warmed my shoulders. The murmurs quieted. The crowd turned. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. This exhibit isn't about money. It isn't about legacy. It's about what we leave behind when no one's looking. The moments we discard, the people we overlook, the truth we try to bury. A rustle in the back. My mother shifted her weight. I continued. These photographs span 15 years. They were taken in alleyways, shelters, rooftops, and waiting rooms. Some were sold. Some were forgotten. All of them collected and preserved by someone who saw worth where others saw waste. Now I turned to face the crowd fully. My grandmother, Eleanor Everly, left me more than $1. She left me this gallery, this collection, and full control of the Everly Arts Initiative, an entity none of you have heard of, but one she built quietly over a decade. Tonight, I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to thank her for seeing me. The silence was perfect, not awkward, not hesitant, just full. Mr. Harlan stepped up beside me holding a folder. He cleared his throat. As the executor of Mrs. Everly's private estate, he said, "It is my honor to confirm that Madeline Everly is the sole beneficiary of the initiative, including all real estate, holdings, collections, and discretionary funds." My father took a step forward. "That's impossible," he muttered. She couldn't bypass the family." "She didn't," I said quietly. "She redefined it." He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw. Brett blurted out, "Wait, so you're rich now?" I smiled. "No, Brett, I'm finally resourced." The crowd chuckled. I turned back to them. The initiative will be launching a residency program next spring, providing studio space, mentorship, and funding for young visual storytellers, especially those outside the traditional gallery system. Art is not a luxury. It's survival, and we're going to prove that. Applause erupted, not thunderous, but real. The kind that came from artists, from believers. My mother looked around, dazed. This was all planned, she whispered. She orchestrated this. I looked at her. She did, but not to punish you, to protect me, to give me a chance to build something real. They didn't have anything else to say. What could they say? I left them standing in that gallery, surrounded by photos they didn't understand and futures they would never control. Outside, the streetlights buzzed, the city hummed like it was proud of me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I felt like I'd arrived. Back upstairs, in the loft above the gallery, I poured a glass of wine and stood barefoot by the window. Below me, people still moved in and out of the exhibit. A woman cried in front of a photo of her own neighborhood. A teenager took a picture of the framed dollar with shaking hands. And I knew. The gallery wasn't mine. It was theirs. Ours. But I had lit the first match. I didn't hear from my parents after that, not a word. No call, no cryptic texts about appearances or brunch. It was as if I'd been erased, which, ironically, was the most honest they'd ever been with me. But I wasn't waiting on their approval anymore. I had walls to fill. In the months that followed, the Everly Arts Initiative transformed from a quiet name in a dusty ledger into something living, something loud. We launched the Witness Residency, a 6-month program for emerging photographers. Applications poured in, from Harlem, from Texas, from Oakland, from students and veterans and refugees. Not a single one had a family name. I watched them walk through the gallery doors for the first time, wide-eyed, half in disbelief, each of them holding a camera that had seen better days, each of them carrying stories no one had bothered to ask about. They called me director, but I preferred keeper of doors, keeper of space, the kind my grandmother once carved out for me. One night, as I was closing up the gallery, a young artist named Leah stopped me. She was 16, wore combat boots 2 sizes too big. She held out a faded photograph. It was of her grandmother, standing in front of a shuttered library in Detroit. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if people only see the money behind your work now?" I didn't flinch. "All the time," I said. "But I learned something." She raised her eyebrows. "If you lead with your truth, the rest is just static." She nodded slowly, like she was tucking that phrase somewhere deep, and I realized this was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the gallery, not the deed, not the curated headlines calling me the rogue heir. It was this, to see someone who thinks they're invisible and say, "I see you, let's begin." On the 1-year anniversary of my grandmother's death, I received one final envelope from Mr. Harlan. Not a letter, just a single card. On one side, a photo I had taken when I was 20, black and white, my grandmother sitting at a window, her reflection lost in the city lights. On the back, in her handwriting, "You were never the legacy I left behind. You were the legacy I was waiting for." That night, I left the gallery doors unlocked, left the lights low, let people wander in and out, a couple tourists, a group of students, one older man who stared at a photograph of a closed-down diner for 20 straight minutes. They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. Because legacy doesn't need explanation. It just needs light. And now, I hold the switch.